presenting on the folk in the boardroom specialist directors in China.
So thank you, Vivien, and thank you, Dan, and the other organizers for inviting me to this conference. I'm really honored. This is joint work with Lin Lin, because Lin Lin's an institutional expert on China. I'm not. And I was going to make a joke, but I decided to cut out the joke due to time constraints. Essentially, the joke is that this slide was supposed to be, Lin Lin explicitly told me to change this slide because the paper has nothing to do with Singapore. But I forgot, right? So it's still there. But anyway, I decided to leave it in as an afterthought because it's a joke. Okay. All right, so back to the serious stuff. So this paper's inspiration came from Yaron and Neely and Shapira, who basically say that, okay, we have been talking about independent directors for many, many years, but now we want to shift our gears and think about directors as specialists. So if you think about directors as specialists, essentially what we're saying is that directors are appointed for narrow domain-specific expertise. Now, why is this important? According to Neely and Shapira, this is really important because you need a director to have a certain level of skill before they're able to discharge their duties. According to this Neely and Shapira, this Yale Journal Regulation paper, functional specialists are reshaping board composition, and this is driven by, among other things, investor pressure, sector regulation, so all of these are market forces, as well as litigation risk due to Caremark liability from Boeing. Okay, so that's the main thing. In fact, I'm kind of working with them on another paper looking at the empirical evidence for that, right? Because these are just claims, we need to back them up empirically. And one thing when I thought about reading the paper and working with them is that, well, is this generalizable to other jurisdictions, right? So we have specialist directors, presumably according to Neely and Shapira, they play an important role, but is this generalizable, okay? Now, the kind of motivation for this paper is that China is a nice counterpoint to study whether it's generalizable, okay? And the reason for this is because China separates what the US conflates in the sense that they have similar law on the books in regard to certain aspects. For example, they have similar legal mandates requiring more than 1/3 of the board to be independent directors, and they require more than one accounting professional on the audit committee. However, the two ownership types have fundamentally different selection logics. So in other words, I'm just going to gloss over this point due to time constraints. The board appointment process and the audience receptive to what the board produces is fundamentally different in China and the United States. And this provides us with a very nice juxtaposition of the two systems, which allows us to think about how this would pan out in other jurisdictions, okay? And furthermore, one important reason why we looked at China is because China has very nice and crisp data. So I work with a lot of I'm kind of like the data person for a lot of people, and I worked on a lot of jurisdictions data, and I can tell you that even though Singapore is very AI forward, working with Singapore has been one of the most difficult data from an empiricist point of view. Working with Singapore data is really, really difficult because MAS and SGX just throws us like 20,000, 30,000 PDFs, and I have to think about the AI computer science architecture as to how to parse the data, okay? In China and United States, it's one click. You click the data, it's downloaded, okay? All right, so how's our paper novel from the existing literature? The first is that we have this novel taxonomy of what types of specialist directors actually sit on Chinese boards. So this is a board composition project. And for us, this board composition project is, I think, novel in the sense that we use a completely different methodology from Yaron and Roy, okay? So Yaron and Roy are blessed because the SEC has this regulation SK, which allows them to scrape this data concerning specialist directors. We don't, okay? So we have to resort like Chun, Wei, and Dan mentioned yesterday, they're looking at some, they don't have the benefit of some SEC regulations, so we are facing the same problem, okay? Second thing is we're asking which specialists predict lower related party transactions. I'll talk about why this is important later. And we find that only specialists, financial specialists on SOE boards predict lower RPTs, okay? why is this result even important? So I'll tell you why. In a nutshell, this result is important because it provides meat for our theory. So we provide a novel theory called the audience legibility principle, whereby board seats can provide governance value when these things are satisfied, when certain conditions are satisfied. Okay, so that this is our contribution for our paper, which I think has important lessons for comparative scholars. Okay, now there are two questions which Neely and Shapiro missed. So recall, Neely and Shapiro are thinking about, when is it that we are appointing some specialists on the board when we could actually appoint the specialist as an employee or hire them as a consultant, right? So for them, it's all about governance, okay? So the specialist director brings to the table certain things, informational role that a consultant could not, because directors presumably have more access to the information of the firm, right? They have more legal rights, so on and so forth. Okay, now there are two other things which I think they missed, and here we contribute to the literature. The first is appointment. So in terms of like how the directors are actually appointed, Neely and Shapiro don't really talk about this. And we think that, if you just think about how the directors are appointed, one really important aspect is the labor market. So in order to fill director seats with specialists, it needs to be attractive enough for directors to actually, for directors with skills to sit on those director seats. Now it turns out that in the United States, this market for directors is quite vibrant and active. In China, there are other opportunities outside. Okay, so like if you're a specialist in China, it turns out that you're more attracted by the outside option instead of going for, this director seat option. The second thing I think, which is even more first order, i.e. more important, is the supply side of things. Okay, so like in terms of the audience, you need an audience which is receptive to what's being produced by the board. So if the audience is not receptive to what's being produced by the board, it's useless writing so many reports. Okay, so if you write lots of reports, we need an audience that's receptive to it. Okay, now what's our data? So, sorry, I'm just going to make another joke again. We have like 30 firms. We have 179,000 director biographies. Okay, so we have a lot of data. So this is a lot of data, and we have about 5,287 firms, 180K director biographies. So we have lots, very rich data set. Okay, now we don't have item 401 of regulation SK in the United States. So what we're going to do is that we're going to use a machine learning approach to classify the directors. Okay, so we're going to ask the machine to classify the directors into different boxes. Now, why is it that we're going to use the methodology we're going to explain shortly? It's because director biographies come in a standard form. Okay, so director biographies come in a standard form, and some things will pop out, some things will not. Okay, the methodology will trade off between two goals of classification. Okay, I'm going to talk about that now. Look at the last bullet point. The methodology trades off prior agnosticism versus coverage. So what is prior agnosticism? We don't want us to have some kind of bias when we classify the directors. So imagine we have this task, okay? We're thinking about what kind of specialist directors appear on Chinese boards. We don't know, right? We have no idea, okay? So what we're going to do is that we're going to remove our director biases, not director biases, we're going to remove our researcher biases and let the machine do the job. One way of thinking about this is that we are essentially using an LLM like ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever LLM can think of to classify the directors as to say, given this biography, is this director specialist or not, okay? And we do this through a clustering process which basically matches directors with similar CVs together. So if you have, for example, like accounting training for 3 years, you're gonna be lumped together with someone similar. Okay, if you have like specialist training in computing for 10 years, you're gonna be lumped together with someone else. So from this, we can identify distinct classes of directors in a visual image that can illustrate what we are trying to get at. Okay, so because we found that this approach was pretty coarse, in other words, the AI was quite conservative. What we did was that we did some kind of keyword forensics based on Linlin's prior knowledge. Okay, so Linlin thinks, okay, I think that the directors have certain characteristics, and we kind of did a second pass. So this was how we came out with our categories, right? Okay, so first pass in terms of categories, what stood out is like just the ostensible lack of specialist directors in China. If you did the same pass in the United States, and I did, and we should actually include this in the paper, you see that there are actually a lot more distinct clusters. So what's really interesting is that you see really different patterns just by comparing United States and China, okay? What stood out to me was like you have this huge cluster of financial accounting professionals that is completely agnostic to researcher priors. So we did not have any idea that the AI would identify financial agnostic accounting-based directors, but it did, okay? And it's like 12.3%. All right, so I'm running out of time, so I will skip some of this stuff. Okay, what's important is that, so we can take a look at the percentages. You can see there's about 8%, 2% for engineering directors, 16% for bureaucrats, 19% for academics, and it's just and produces an entirely different composition from the United States. Okay, so one thing that's interesting is the SOE versus POE comparison. So if you look at SOEs, you have a lot more hidden bureaucrats compared to, or rather just bureaucrats compared to private-owned enterprises. And in terms of financial specialists, you have less financial specialists in the SOEs. Okay. All right. So I'm going to skip past independent directors because due to time constraints. Now this is really quite an important slide. It shows that we don't see any of the stuff that appears in the Neely Shapiro data set. Okay. So for them, they see a lot of ESG, climate sustainability, DEI, human rights, safety, cybersecurity directors. We don't see any of this stuff. Even when we tried our best, we could only see like 0.2 to 1% of all directors who were classified under these categories. So the categories that emerge are completely different, right? So I'm going to move quickly to kind of like just non-causal inference. Okay, so I write different papers, this for a legal audience, so there's no causal inference here. We're using RPTs as a way to proxy for governance impact, okay, like are you controlling self-dealing, so on and so forth. And it turns out that the only category where things made sense, i.e. that where you had significant results, was where you had financial specialists and in SOE firms, right? Everything else did not matter. Now, this is a really interesting result because for 2 decades we've been talking about independent directors. And here we have like this centerpiece of 2 decades of Chinese corporate governance not doing any work at all. Okay, so it was really quite fascinating to see this. And let me put it in a blunter and more impactful way. What's really driving this reduction in RPTs is not so much independence per se. Independence matters, but not per se, but rather specialist prowess, okay? Specialized skills. So I think that's a kind of real impactful knowledge. I don't have glasses, so I didn't see anything. I'm playing more cards. Okay, so very quickly on to the theory. So the theory is about the audience legibility principle, demand side, right? So if we think about demand side in the Chinese jurisdiction, we need an audience, we need the production, what the board produces to be legible to an audience external to the form, okay? Not going to go too much into the signaling-oriented pathways. I had several conversations with some of you regarding signaling. Essentially what's going on is that the board can signal to external participants in 2 ways. One is by way of just appointment. I appoint someone to the board. That's a way of signaling that, I care about this issue or that issue. Another way is that, of course, if someone reads the records, then that is going to be impactful, right? And why is this important? This is important because of recall our theory concerning SOEs and financial specialists. In an SOE firm, the state is essentially, or the state apparatus is the audience. And so the state apparatus is going to take a close look at what's being produced by those directors in that setting, right? So there are 3 conditions that need to be satisfied: functional expertise in a seat. So if you don't have functional expertise, then you're just signing off stuff that has no informational value, right? Second thing is that there needs to be procedural architecture, and this is where the law comes in. Third thing is that there needs to be an external audience, like a controlling shareholder, okay? And stripping anyone breaks the chain, okay? Now in the United States, essentially what happens is that institutional directors, give me 30 seconds, proxy advisors, plaintiff bar, so on and so forth, they read appointments as public signals. In China, for many reasons in detail in the paper, the audience is very thin due to free float being low, institutional investors are state affiliated. I left out the point concerning lack of activism because of Dan Chun and Wei's paper, which changed my mind. And so, okay. And on the supply side, we just have like different opportunity costs, as mentioned earlier, with regard to serving on the board. Okay, so the only thing that matters is financial and SOE. Okay, so I already repeated this earlier. Not going to go into the institutional details. Now, just let me conclude. So, implications. There's convergence of form, but divergence of function. We have convergence of form in terms of what's the law on the books in relation to financial directors. However, we have complete divergence of function, right? Not only do we have divergence of function in relation to categories, we also have divergence of function in relation to what actually happens in relation to RPTs. So that's a great thing about having like data to back our claims, even though it's not causal, okay? Yeah, so we think that same mandate, different audiences will give rise to different outcomes. Equilibria just means outcomes. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Kenneth. So, Takuma, I think you're doing the comments, right?
Good morning. I'm deeply honored to have been invited as a discussant for insightful, fascinating paper, and I'm also very grateful to the authors for sharing a revised version ahead of the forum. I'm delighted to find that they had already been thinking along similar lines to one of my principal concerns. But since my slide had already been submitted, I was not able to revise them, but I will address the revised version in my oral comments whether I can. The original paper's central claim is this slide. The specialist director mandates, I forget it, sorry. Specialist director mandates produce governance value only when the appointment mechanism supplies much expertise and the institutional architecture provides a procedural channels through which the specialist can act. Drawing nearly 180,000 directors' biographies from over 5,000 firms across 15 years. The paper shows that hidden bureaucrats occupy nearly 3 in 10 SOE board seats compared with 1 in 10 in private firms. And among all the board composition variables, only one produces a robust governance association. Financial specialists on SOE boards predict significantly lower related party transaction levels. I should note that at set, the revised paper has moved beyond this two condition framing, building instead around an audience legibility principle. The idea that a board set generates governance value only when the occupants' expertise become legible to an external audience. So that is a genuine advance. My 3 comments will build towards that assessment. So, Neely and Shapiro asked whether specialist directors work. This paper asks the prior question, or when is that question even askable? Their argument rests on 3 assumptions that are simply true in the United States, but fail in concentrated ownership jurisdictions. First, appointment pressure. In concentrated ownership, the controller decides alone. No institutional investor pressure reaches the nomination process. So condition one fails at the source. The second, the ability to act once seated in China. Only 7 to 8% of independent directors seats hold genuine financial specialists versus 64% of audit committee chairs in the United States S&P 500. The qualified supply simply does not exist at current compensation levels. The third, external accountability. The part-time model dominates. A relationship logic governs the selection, and reputational discipline is absent. The implication and the revised version makes this even clearer. Is a diagnostic framework applicable to any jurisdiction. Before mandating specialist directors, ask does the appointment mechanism deliver much expertise, and does an external audience exist to lead at what the expertise produces? If either answer is no, the mandate for procedure formal compliance or not governance value. So formal categories travel and the institutional ecosystem do not. So this is a comment too on Vivien and Hamdani assume the controlling shareholder are homogeneous. All controllers prefer compliant directors, so the solution is structural, cut the controller out of the appointment entirely. This paper quietly dismantles that homogeneity assumption. What convenient means differs fundamentally between a private controller and the state. For the private controller, financial expertise is inconvenient. It detects tunneling. For the state controller, financial expertise is partially convenient. It targets the SOE-specific risk of unfair pricing and state asset erosion. And the state has built for its own compliance purposes a procedural architecture that actives and expertise once it reaches the board. That is why financial specialists reduce RPT in SOEs but not POEs. The heterogeneity is the finding, not the background. The authors, authors themselves flag the SOE or POE binary, which I questioned in my slide, but as a limitation, the category masks important gradations that connect directly to comment 3. And slide 5 and 6 in the original paper, condition 2 was defined as procedure channels independent of controlling shareholder, but the channel it pointed to the 3 major one large system of party committee level SASAC requirements are designed and operated by the state controller. My critique was simple. Why does a controller design the channel constrain the controller's own agents? What stops the party from simply overriding the channel, or when a transaction it wants to the approval come before the audit committee? The revised version addresses this directly. The answer is theoretically substantial. The authors introduces the audience eligibility principle. The question shifts from is the channel independent of the controller to who reads the records, the channel procedures. That is a different question and a better one. In the SOE context, the answer is state itself. The interstate accountability machinery, SASAC, party discipline, audit review, has both standing and incentive to lead the records SOE audit committee to generate. The channel constrains state agents not because it's independent of the state, but because another part of the state is watching. The revised paper gives this 3 condition structure. The first condition is functional expertise, discriminate within a domain, genuine specialist versus best director. The second is a procedural architecture, discriminate between dominants. Financial review has record posting obligation. Cybersecurity and ESG do not anywhere. Crucially, this second condition applies to both SOEs and POEs alike. So Chinese disclosure obligation and audit committee requirements cover both ownership type. The SOE and POE divergence is therefore not about the procedure. It's entirely about the third condition, that is who leads the outcome. The state reads the records in SOEs. No equivalent external audience exists in POEs. This is a genuine theoretical advance, and it has a further implication that the revised paper makes explicit. The audience resibility principle is not only a theory of when specialists, I have a glass, so when specialist directors work, it's a theory of when a board seat is worth having at all, rather than simply placing the same expertise below the board as a consultant or employee. Where neither pathway operates, the firm has no reason to prefer board placement. However, two questions remain. The first question is, what does the procedural pathway actually guarantee? The independence literature provides ex-ante deterrence. So the director's insultation was supposed to make the threat of challenge credible in advance. The revised paper explicitly abandons that account. In its place, audience resibility offers ex post accountability, and an external audience reads the record and acts. But for this ex post mechanism to produce ex-ante deterrence, the financial specialist must anticipate that record will be read and adjust accordingly. That feedback loop is what the revised paper does not yet specify. And as the author acknowledged, association may reflect selection rather than monitoring. Compliance-oriented SOE may simply hire more specialists and conduct fewer RPTs. If so, we are back to asking what determines who get appointed. The question the independence literature was always trying to answer. The second question is, what lies beyond RPTs? RPTs are well chosen, disclosed, quantifiable, and precisely the domain where the procedural pathway is predicted to operate. But they capture one dimension of governance failure. They do not capture strategic decision quality, broader management accountability, or the ESG and technical failures the signaling pathway is supposed to address. And there is a structural tension in the papers on logic. The framework measures governance value only where all three conditions coincide. Precisely, the cell it predicts will show its effect. As the author note in their own footnote, condition 1 and condition 2 failures cannot be separated in the data. The core of audience resibility principles still need to be articulated. The last slide is just my summary of comment and original paper, and the revised version resolves the central question I had identified. That is a genuine step forward. I look forward, but I have two questions for you, so I look forward to author's response. Thanks so much.